the information, and then we will close the slides and have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of that. So if we're ready, we can just we can start moving through them. So maybe Katie, if you can advance to the first slide. So just today, a little bit about the agenda. We're going to provide some background about the program, talk about the program impact and, about the matching funds, talk about the benefits to arts organizations and how arts organizations can benefit through some long-term funding opportunities, what it means to partner with your community foundations across the province. We are a network of 14 community foundations across Alberta. And also then lastly, we'll just talk about how to apply to this program. That's an annual program. And then we'll have some Q&A and some next steps. So we'll just head to the next slide. So for those of you, I know some of you may know a little bit about this program, and for others, it might be a new program. But the Endowment Incentive Program, it comes from the Canadian Cultural Investment Fund of the federal government. So within the Department of Heritage, which I think, many of you as arts organizations have had a relationship with or have worked with in the past for funding opportunities. And this particular program encourages private donors to contribute to endowment funds for charities and nonprofits that are established at community foundations so that you can have an established a sustainable level of funding. And what that means is that when those endowment funds are established at community foundations, every year you receive an annual distribution to support your working capital or your operations of your organization. So the two main objectives of this particular program is to build a secure long-term future for arts organizations and also to encourage private sector donors to support arts organizations in perpetuity. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this program has been around for, about, I think, since 2011. And it's really been benefiting the long-term financial health of over 300 arts organizations across the country to date. So just some statistics about this program. So yes, specifically, there's been development of arts endowments for over 230 arts organizations. It has leveraged private sector donations, so donations of individuals, that is over $480 million to date since the program started. Right now, currently, we've got over 100, almost 110 public charitable foundations that are partnering with those arts organizations to participate in this program. And organizations since inception have received almost $350 million. So you'll note that the ratio of the match every year is not quite the same. It does vary on a year-to-year basis, but still with almost $350 million in matching grants, that's considerable amounts of money going into permanent endowment funds to support arts organizations across the country, which is fantastic. And so this slide just looks a little bit about the matching funds. So as it says, eligible applicants receive funding from the investment fund to match funds that you have raised that have gone into the endowments, and it is up to a 1-to-1 match every year. So this graph just shows you going back to 2015. At that date, we had a 1-to-1 match. So for every dollar raised and put into endowment, the government matched it for $1. We've had years that have been just above the 50% mark. So it does vary on an annual basis, largely due to the number of applicants, the requested amounts coming from those applicants, and the amounts that are available from the Canadian Heritage Endowment itself. So it just gives you a picture of what you're looking at. But I'll turn it over to Noel to talk a little bit about some of the other additional information here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Allison. And I have 3 screens open. So if I look off to the side, my apologies. I've just got notes because I don't want to miss anything in sharing this information with you. So if I'm looking off to the side, please bear with me. So let's talk a little bit about the eligibility criteria for an arts organization that wants to participate in the CCIF program. So the organization, first and foremost, has to be incorporated under the appropriate jurisdiction, and it's got to be registered or operating as a charitable organization as per the Income Tax Act. And most importantly, it has to have as its principal mission those following points that are here on the screen. You've got to be in the business of, I'll say, creation or production of professional artistic works, or the present and or the presentation of professional artistic works, and or the training of professional artists. So this is the first criteria that an organization has to look at, and whether or not they qualify here before they can consider applying for the program. So I'll go to the next slide. So another piece is the funding. And so an organization that is receiving dollars from one of these sources over the last 5 years also is eligible for the program. So core funding has to have come from Canada Council for the Arts. Could have also been a project grant or a composite grant from CCA, or core funding from a municipal, provincial, or territorial arts council. And or you've got to have received, or you had to have received, sorry, Canada Arts Presentation Funding, or Canada Arts Training Funding, or Fathers of Confederation Buildings Trust. So if you don't have funding from one of those organizations, then you've got to prove that you demonstrate so you got to demonstrate that you operate at a professional level. And so what does that mean to operate at a professional level? There are a couple of more criteria points that are on the CCIF website. I actually just looked just before we started the session. They've not updated the website yet for this year. But they said that they would have it updated by the middle of September. So I suspect any day now. But to operate as a professional performing arts organization, that means that you've got to have a paid artistic director or equivalent, that you've got to pay artistic fees at established national standards for your particular discipline. And you've got to also, if it's a training program that you are qualifying as, then you've got to offer a professional program under an artistic director or equivalent that's dedicated to preparing professional career students. And you've also got to have an admission, selection, and evaluation process for students and be staffed by qualified artistic and administrative professionals. So what you're hearing here is that you've really got to be operating at a professional level, whether you've received funding from one of these sources on the screen, or whether you can demonstrate that you're operating at a professional level with this criteria. So we'll go on to the next slide. The next piece that you've got to qualify for is financial health. So, and I don't have to tell this to the participants. When you're getting into endowment and you're getting into sustainability funding, you've got to be at a place where you have a reasonable, stable financial situation, so that you can look at building endowment and taking that next step towards creating sustainability for the future. So part of the criteria of the program is that you've got to have been in operation for a minimum of 3 years before you apply. Like I said, there's got to be a certain degree of financial health. And the way they determine that is with a combination of ratios. And the ratios look at your operating revenues as well as your net unrestricted assets. And that's all on the application form. So there's a certain level of percentage that you've got to achieve for different ratios. And so then you've also got to show that you have diversified revenue, that you've got good organizational structure and governance, which must be at arm's length. And like I mentioned, the financial ratios help to determine whether or not you are in a place of financial health. So a little bit of a summary of everything I just said here. Won't repeat, but this is a good slide when you're coming back to look at this later. So basically, the organization has to be incorporated, registered, and have as its principal mission the creation or production of professional artistic works, be a professional arts organization or a training entity. There has to be certain funding that has been received by certain areas or certain sources. I won't repeat that slide. and then the financial health piece. What is considered ineligible, and Allison knows this is a bit of a bee in my bonnet because I don't necessarily agree with this, but we've got to follow the criteria. Unfortunately, heritage organizations, arts competitions, arts service organizations, and cultural industries are not qualified along with their associations. Yes, Tyler, I agree. Sad face. Um, and also sort of crown corporations and municipalities, provinces, territories, etc., are not eligible for the CCIF program. Just waiting for the next slide. There we go. So how do you determine whether or not the dollars are eligible? So as Allison mentioned, the program is designed to encourage private donations from individuals. So it's non-government sources. It could be an individual, it could be a business, or a non-government foundation. They can also include an amount that the organization itself has decided to donate in perpetuity out of its own assets. So the organization itself could choose to fund endowment with their own dollars. There's a timeline to this, and this is new as of last year. Those donations that I just mentioned have to be received in the 24 months preceding the application deadline. So the application deadline every year is December 1st. And so you're looking at the 24 months before that. New last year was another requirement that the minimum ask for an application is $5,000. So it used to be that you could apply with any amount of eligible donations that fit within the criteria I just mentioned, but now the program is asking for a minimum of $5,000. But then they extended that window of opportunity to be 2 years, so they made it a little bit more manageable or accessible. There is a limit to the maximum, so 5,000 is the minimum. There's a maximum amount, and it depends on the size of the organization, the operating revenues. So as you can see there, the amount that you can ask for is the lesser of $2 million or 50% of the average total of the operating revenues for your last 3 years. So it really depends on your situation. And there is a calculation that you have to fill out in the application form, which we'll get to in a second. Once an organization has received matching dollars of 10 million or well, maximum of 10 million, sorry, then the program is qualified only to the lesser of $1 million or again, 50% of your operating revenues over the last 3 years. So this is in place to sort of control the size of the organizations that are participating. Some dollars that are not eligible for matching. So I've already talked about what is eligible. So any government funding that is added to an endowment does not qualify. Pledges do not qualify, nor do bequests that are in probate. So again, something that you're waiting on. You've got to wait till it's in the door. You can't double dip by counting annual revenues that have been generated by an endowment fund. And you can't request dollars for which matching funds have already been requested. So Allison mentioned earlier the percentage of matching, where it was as high as $1 1-to-1, but it tends to be less than that. So you can't go back and apply for matching on anything that wasn't matched in previous years. And then nothing that's already been awarded through this matching program. So that's a good summary list for you to come back to later. So I'm going to turn it back over to Allison to talk about why you should consider doing this for your arts organization.
Thanks, Noel. Is it great? One of the questions that we get often is why would we put, funding into an endowment program? Why would we partner, work together, with community foundations on this? And so we thought we'd just kind of give you 3 reasons, as to what those top reasons are. And really for us, it's about strengthening that relationships. And it's about, the local community foundations getting to know your individual arts organizations and to build that relationship, to know what's going on and how we might support you, and to know what's going on in community foundations. We are a network of over 100 community foundations across Canada, and we've got 14 in Alberta. And so we're well positioned to support charities as they are looking at becoming more sustainable, as they're looking at building their relationships with your own donors in your organizations. Often donors want to give both for your operations on a daily basis, but also to think about the future. Maybe it's about bequests or any kind of more complex gifting. And so we're well positioned as a community foundation to help you to work with your donors on those types of situations. And so, yeah, so as it says here, contributions can be made into the fund now, and it can also potentially be a bequest in the future that would go into that fund, where then you can take that gift and ask for matching funds. It's really about sharing that power of endowment with your individual donors and helping donors to understand what an endowment does in terms of holding that capital, investing that capital, and watching that fund grow over time. And many community foundations have an investment strategy that in addition to capital being added by gifts, but our investment strategies are to help those funds grow over time. And so while you're receiving the annual distribution, if the investment earnings are greater than that, it goes back into the capital to help it grow, so that your endowment will grow over time, and then that distribution will grow. And then finally, it's about the diversification of your organization. And I think now more than ever, organizations have seen, especially over the pandemic, that our funding models are changing, and that we really need to diversify, so that if one area of funding decreases, that we've got something else that we can depend on. And so, with investment income and endowments, it really helps create a level of sustainability, and it will help you to be able to budget and to understand where revenues are coming from, and to plan a little bit more. So those are some of our top reasons, and we'll go to the next slide. And so just a bit, on endowment funds in particular. And so when we use the word endowment fund in a community foundation, what we mean is that fund is held in perpetuity, and that really means forever. And so those assets are protected in the community foundation, with the idea that you will receive an annual distribution to support your operations. And what is nice about that is that it's undesignated. So wherever you need to top up your funds, or wherever you need to put money into your different programs, that an endowment fund helps you to do that. So it's a tool for planning for long-term sustainability. There's an agreement that comes into between the charity and the foundation about, what does that look like? How is the money invested? What does the distribution periods look like? So that's all understood ahead of time. We have here that the minimum initial contribution to establish a fund is 10,000. That is a number that we have put as really an arbitrary number, really for organizations to look at as to what is a good amount of capital that can then spin off a distribution. So right now at Calgary Foundation, our annual distribution is 5%. So if you know that your capital is 10,000, it's going to be invested, that your annual distribution would be about 5% of that on an annual basis. And that is the CRA requirement of a minimum distribution. I know, Noel, maybe you want to talk a little bit about Edmonton Community Foundation, because you do have a little bit of flexibility on that, and other community foundations may as well have different scenarios. But if you just want to share what you do in Edmonton, that might help.
Absolutely, yeah. So like Calgary Foundation, Edmonton Community Foundation's minimum is $10,000 as well, but we actually give organizations some time to get their funds up to the $10,000. So we call that an emerging fund. And I believe, Allison, you've got a similar model.
Mhm.
Um, and the reason we had the 10,000 here is, like Allison said, we want you to commit a certain level of capital that's going to grow over time and make a difference. But at the same time, we recognize that perhaps some smaller organizations, or organizations that are not sure if they're going to be eligible and don't want, just want to test the waters, so to speak. We do give you the opportunity here in Edmonton to start the fund with a smaller amount, below 10,000, but with the commitment that you'll grow it to the 10,000 over 3 years.
Thanks.
Mhm.
And we talk about in perpetuity, meaning that these funds are held and locked in. And one of the criteria of the program from Canadian Heritage is actually that the funds that are matched, so their funds that are received into the endowments, are not touched. So if an organization comes to us and says, okay, we actually need to encroach on the capital, we need an annual distribution that's greater than, um, we are we aren't able to do that as per Canadian Heritage regulation. And so um, the rules are such that if you are to encroach on that capital or shut down that fund, that anything that they have matched plus interest would have to be returned to them. So we are very specific in maintaining that regulation, and that everything is held in perpetuity for the organization. Pooled and invested to generate income. So again, all of that money that's, the capital that's in your fund, it is pooled with the primary endowments of the community foundations, and it is invested with the purpose of generating the income for distribution and long-term growth of the fund. So, those are some of the logistics around an endowment fund that are at community foundations. So it's just some idea of, the community foundation and the program partnership. So across our province in Alberta to date, we have 40 organizations between Calgary and Edmonton. I know that a few organizations in Lethbridge actually have participated as well with their local foundation, but we don't have those specific numbers. But, between our two communities, we've got 17 existing organizations in Calgary and 23 in Edmonton. And you can see there, so far since program inception and we started, both of our organizations have been involved. Calgary has received over 10 million in matching funds, and Edmonton over 15 million in matching funds. So pretty significant over a short period of time of what's being invested into our local arts communities, which we're really excited about. So we just wanted to give a little bit of an example here of some different organizations. And these are actually two organizations in Calgary, and we might actually have some representatives of those charities on our calls today. So heads up that I'm highlighting you and the relationship that we have with you in these funds. So on the left-hand side, we have the New Gallery, also known as Clouds and Water, here in Calgary. And they started up their fund in 2017, so just a few years ago. In the opening balance, or what was contributed initially, they're in the chat box. They're greeting everybody. So thanks for showing up today. But yeah, their fund was started with $20,000. And, over the course of a couple of years, that balance of that fund has gone up to $78,000. And so right now, in the match that we have received in that endowment fund from the government over the past couple of years, is just over $30,000. So for a very small artist-run gallery that does significant work in community, but is small in nature, with an annual operating budget, just over $250,000, this is a really significant impact to the organization, I think, and some really great work from that organization and really focusing on building that up and sharing the story of this program with their donors. So then on the other side, we have Calgary Opera, which is a bit of a bigger organization on the other side of the spectrum, in terms of size and age, an annual operating budget about $4 million, $4.5 million. And they were funded in 2002, the fund, again, with an opening balance of under $20,000. And, the current balance of that fund being over $4 million, their government match, as you can see at the bottom, has been $1.6 million, almost 1.7. So again, the ability to really grow that fund over a period of time by, sharing the story with their donors and, having their donors contribute to this fund to attract that match from the government. So, it doesn't matter. A lot of organizations, ask us about the size. Doesn't matter, if we're a small organization, can we do it? And I think that these examples show that the answer is yes. When you've got a will to do it and an ability to communicate to your donors or look at other ways, of putting away your unexpected revenues or surpluses that you can set up a fund and attract some matching dollars.
So I'll take over from here. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Allison. Yes, and that's right, Tyler. Way to go, New Gallery and Calgary Opera. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the application. So it is a joint application. So and it's online. It's set up in tabs if you've never seen it before. And there's a part for the arts organization to fill out, and there is a part for the foundation to fill out. So I tell our arts partners, Allison, I always say, bear with us because you have to fill out one half and I have to fill out 11 halves or 8 halves, depending on the year. So we each contribute parts of the application so that it is all submitted together. The first part you'll see here is the same responsibility for both the arts partner and the foundation. And that is to ensure that those donations are eligible that I mentioned before, private, etc. The eligible donations are received and deposited. This is important. Part of the application is an attestation that we have received and deposited the dollars. And so for the foundation, we've got to have received those monies before the application. And so it's always a bit of a rush at the end for any last minute dollars that are coming in. So both organizations have to ensure that. And then we have to ensure our supporting documentation. So each organization has slightly different items that they need to submit, but the arts organization has to have a board resolution. So if you're in Edmonton, I would have sent you an email reminder a couple of weeks ago to get your board resolutions done. And then for the foundation, we've got to have certain information as well. And then both organizations have to submit financial statements. Um, for the arts organization, you also have to break down how those eligible dollars came to be. So there's a worksheet that you calculate, and there's also that ratio that I mentioned earlier. So you'll have to submit information about your operating revenues and your unrestricted assets. On our end, we have to submit some financial information around the endowment itself. So if you're new, we wouldn't have had this information, but if you're a returning participant and you've got an existing endowment fund, then it's up to us on our end to provide reporting on how the endowment has performed. So we've got to talk about the fair market value, the return on the investment, any admin fees, and then grants that have gone out to you in the previous year. So that's our responsibility. And then we have to make sure that all the signatures are in place. So because it's a joint submission, both organizations have to sign. So there's a representative, usually the CEO or the artistic director, and so it depends. You'll assign someone to be the signatory. So both organizations have to sign the application, and then we've got to ensure and we've got to prove that we are following terms and conditions as per the granting responsibilities that Allison referred to earlier. So each organization has its own responsibilities. Some are the same, but at the end of the day, we're both providing information into one application that is submitted by December 1st. So here's a list of some of those things that we have to do. So there's that attestation that I talked about. That's both organizations have to do that. Then there's a foundation form that we will provide and some supporting documents that we provide. You'll see the financial statements there. For the arts organization, you've got to provide the breakdown of how those eligible dollars came in. So there's a short and fairly simple chart that talks about number of gifts from individuals, number of gifts from corporations, number of gifts from non-government foundations, whether or not any of those gifts were gifts of securities. So fairly straightforward, but it is a breakdown that you will have to provide as the arts organization. If it's your first time, you may have to provide your letters patent and amendments, your status of incorporation, your mandate and bylaws, your sorry, no, that's our documentation. If it's the first time, sorry, I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm reading and not listening to myself. That's our that's our section. For yours, if it's your first time, you've got to provide financial statements, a review engagement report if the ask is less than $250,000, If you're asking for more than $250,000, then you've got to have a full audit and you've got to provide that information. You do have to provide your amendments, your incorporation status, your bylaws, etc. For both organizations in subsequent years, you don't have to provide all this information, only things that have changed. So once you've become part of the program and you're applying in a second, third, or subsequent year, you'll have to provide updated financial statements and your updated audit or your review engagement report, but you might not have to submit your bylaws every year if there haven't been any changes. If there have been, then you submit the changes. So that list is there for you to review later on when you're looking at this um, presentation. Sorry. So timeline. Um, So as I mentioned earlier, I did check the website just before we logged on here together. They have not updated their guidelines, but I do encourage you to keep checking over the next couple of days, over the next week. The application guidelines, forms, and any other information is updated on the Canadian Heritage website, usually by the middle of September. As I mentioned, December 1st is that's the key date. Application must be submitted, and it can be submitted online, must be submitted to Canadian Heritage on December the 1st for those donations received in the previous 24 months. And then all of us wait for a few months. We then get an announcement by email in March on whether or not the organization was successful in being eligible for this match, and then what the match will be. So what typically happens in March, usually around the second week of March, there's an email that comes and it's CC'd to uh, the representatives from the arts organization and the representatives from the foundation. And it's a letter, congratulations letter saying that this organization has been approved. The match is this much. What was the percentage? And then we get the dollars at the foundation by the end of March. So it happens very quickly at the end of March. And the reason for that is that, as many of you likely know, the federal fiscal year is March 31st. So they want to get all their ducks in a row before their year end. So, so that sort of goes, that December 1st date. I want to go back to that December 1st date. I don't know, Allison, if you do this, but for any Edmonton partners on the call, because we have to fill out all these applications and get everything in the door and make sure that the donations are deposited, we will actually ask our partners and our donors to contribute in advance of December 1st. So Allison, for us here in Edmonton, we've actually said November 15th this year. Do you have something similar?
Yeah, that's about right too, just because of the work that it takes to get the money deposited. So we usually set a date, depending on the calendar, between the 10th and the 15th of November, that we have everything contributed into the funds so that we have the time to be able to process it and account for it.
Exactly. Yeah, that goes back to my joke, but not joke, that you have to only fill out one half of your application as an arts partner, but we have to fill out all the halves for each of those applications. So we ask that you just give us a couple of weeks for us to do all of that. So that's not on here because that date changes from time to time, and and I don't know about you, Allison, but if someone shows up on November 16th or 17th, we're not going to tell them that they're too late, but it's there as a guideline so that we all have time to make sure, as Allison said, that everything's done and that the application's ready to go for December 1st. That date cannot be changed. Yeah. So that's pretty much our information. The last slide is just a quote. If uh, this is from Allison talked about Calgary Opera. Our biggest partner here in Edmonton is Edmonton Opera, and this is a quote that came to us during the pandemic from the vice chair, where they were talking about the absolute importance of their endowment during COVID, when everything came to a grinding halt and the arts could not continue. Edmonton Opera said, "Our endowment fund is helping us to breathe as we continue to fight our way through these COVID times." This is actually an excerpt from a longer quote, where Francis actually talks about their endowment being like their ventilator, which already sounds a little bit dated, but if you recall, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about ventilators keeping people alive. And the longer quote from Francis is that he talks about the ventilator being their endowment, and they don't think they would have made it without having the endowment support. So going back to Allison's point about why partnering with community foundations to take advantage of this program, it could literally be a life changer. So I think that concludes. Katie, is that right? Next one is, yes, Q&A.
Yeah.
So I'd like us to open it up now to the group. I see there are about 25 people on the call. Allison and I invite you to speak up or raise your hand, or yeah, happy to answer any questions you may have. And actually, before you do that, I just want to say thanks, Katie, for managing us. And putting the slide deck together and running the slides. And I want to thank Deborah for interpreting for us. Thank you both.
Yes, thanks so much. Maybe I'm just, I know there was one question in the chat box
Okay.
about museum participation. Katie, do you remember that question? Can't quite see it.
Yeah, it was just to me personally, and
Oh.
a quick question around if there's parameters around museums being able to participate in the program, and if we know of maybe some instances where they are eligible to participate. As we've discussed before, sometimes the eligibility criteria isn't as black and white as we'd like it to be.
So I think Alice and I both have an answer for that one. So in my previous life, I worked at the Art Gallery of Alberta, and I had come from Edmonton Opera. So I was excited to run the program at the Art Gallery. And unfortunately, art galleries and museums do not qualify for this program because they fall under that heritage organization criteria. But there are instances, and Allison, I believe you have an example in Calgary, where so long as that organization does fulfill the sort of all those criteria pieces around being a performing professional arts organization, and or being a trainee program of professional artists, there are ways that perhaps a museum or an art gallery could qualify. And you have one of those as a partner, don't you, Allison?
We do have one of those as a partner. And so again, very much, I won't reiterate what Noel said, but I think that's where there are some technicalities. And so, when you're looking at the criterias, I think Noel and I would both recommend, reaching out to Canadian Heritage and just talking through, what it is exactly that you're doing to see if that criteria meets the program so that you are able to either set up that endowment or apply for that program. Because with those particular stipulations, some organizations with a bigger mandate, where you might think that you can't participate, you actually can. So give them a shout.
Yeah.
I see, Simon, you have your hand up.
Hi, Simon. I had the pleasure of meeting Simon just a few days ago in Medicine Hat for the Lieutenant Governor's Arts Awards. So hi, Simon, how are you? Oh, you're on mute. I can't unmute. Uh-oh. Okay, why don't you type your question into the...
Oh, sorry. I will actually allow people to unmute. I did that before for a reason.
Yes, thanks, Katie. There we go. See if Simon can... There he is.
Yeah.
Okay, take your side.
Hey, yeah, first of all, I was just going to say, speaking to that last point around heritage organizations, I do know that there is a fair bit of advocacy work underway to try and address that. So don't lose all hope for those heritage organizations on the call. I was also just going to say the slide, Allison, that you shared around the benefits of partnering with the community foundation, I think was the tip of the iceberg, to say nothing of the investment expertise that the community foundations possess. The sort of thorough understanding of what it means to build an endowment, how to leverage that with donors, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a big proponent of this program and would encourage organizations of all sizes to, to sort of explore it. I know I talked to Su Ying a lot when she was at New Gallery and started theirs up, and to see the growth that's already happened in the short period of time is really, really great. My question is sort of related to the idea of smaller organizations accessing that. And I guess my question is, are all dollars treated equally in terms of the matching, or is there any kind of tiering for the first X number of dollars that comes in? I know that when there have been government matching programs in the past, it's the first 5,000 is matched dollar for dollar, and then it gets sort of progressively smaller as it goes. Or is that, you're both shaking your heads, so that's the answer, I guess.
Yeah,
No.
no tiering in this particular program. So that criteria of just the financial restrictions around, the amounts that organizations have asked for or their budgets is really the only criteria or parameters around the finances, but there isn't anything that is about that tiered levels. It's just a straight match.
Mhm. That's right.
Maggie, yeah.
Hi, I'm coming to you from Green Fools. And I guess I was curious about if there are any requirements in regards to how much of your programming is required to be professional performance or presentation. It's a portion of what we do, but it's not everything. And I was curious if there's any sort of guidelines around that.
No, it comes down to what is your main mission and how your mission is described. We actually had an organization last year, and I'm going to go back half a step when Allison said, if you've got questions, reach out to Canadian Heritage. If you're new to this and you don't know how to get a hold of them or where to get a hold of these people, Allison and I have direct contact with Canadian Heritage on this program. So I encourage you to reach out to one of us and say, hey, I'd love to talk to someone, because I know I've introduced new partners to this program, and the program officer is very willing and happy to have initial sort of discovery meetings on Zoom or telephone. So please don't hesitate to do that. But going back to your question, Maggie, we had this situation last year. I thought that this organization would qualify. I reached out to the program officer, gave her a bit of a rundown. She said, sounds good. Let's have a conversation with the partner. So we all had a meeting, and then unfortunately, and then they applied. And unfortunately, even though they were a performing arts organization and they did have some training, at the end of the day, Canadian Heritage determined that it wasn't part of their core mission. So it's not a percentage or an amount, it's just, is this recognized and is this demonstrated as your core mission? So I don't know that that helps you, but yeah, it's not a percentage based, it's not all or nothing. It's just, how is it portrayed as your core mission? Does that help?
And Maggie, I know being a local organization here in Calgary, if you want to have a further chat about that offline, you and I can set up a call for that. And I know there was a question in the chat box about a museum example. It wasn't particularly a museum, but it was an organization that had visual arts component, but had production within that and training. So that's how that organization was able to get through. But again, without sharing too many specifics of individual organizations and their own journeys and stories, again, reach out to Noel or I specifically to work through some of those very specific questions on your organization. Tyler has his hand up.
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
I can. Hi, Tyler.
Hi, Tyler Longmire. I'm the Vice President of the Quick Draw Animation Society based in Calgary, Alberta. We are an arts service organization, which seems to be in the red no-go zone of the slides you presented. We do have some professional components. We do have professional presentation. We do have an artistic director, but it seems like this particular thing from the Canadian Heritage might not be for us. I was wondering if there are other things similar to this program that might be accessible to organizations such as ours who might be in a good financial spot and looking to create an endowment and access these matching funds, but perhaps aren't eligible for this particular one. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with your organization, Tyler, so forgive me. So I'm not sure that Allison, do you have any
No, Tyler, I'm not
ideas in Calgary?
not familiar enough, but maybe again, another conversation outside of this. There are not a ton of, and I actually can't think of anything off the top of my head that is the equivalent of this program for matching funds for endowment building. So there's lots of other ways to create opportunities for donors to get engaged into endowment building in itself. But when it comes to external partners that are matching with these types of programs, I'm not aware of any other ones that are in existence for the arts sector. And in fact, I think that this is the only government program that exists for matching funds for endowments is actually only in the arts sector. So it is a pretty unique program. Other questions? I'm just looking in the chat. I can't see anything else in here, but is there other questions that anybody might have for us today that we can answer while we're all on the screen together?
Maybe I could ask a question that was asked to us previously.
Sure.
Do arts organizations applying need to have capital assets like theater?
Good. That's a good question. And the simple answer is no, you do not.
Thanks. And then what happens if an organization establishes a fund, participates in the program, and eventually winds down its operations or closes its doors?
It's a good question. At the Calgary Foundation, we have, as part of our endowment agreements with charities, a clause in those agreements that states that once an organization sets up an endowment, that endowment is meant to benefit that organization or the charitable mandate of that organization. And so when an organization is shutting down, we will work with that organization, with the board and the executive director or CEOs to determine who is the next recipient of that annual contribution, that annual distribution. So we would look at, is there an organization that is absorbing the organization that's shutting down? Is there an organization that is taking on the programs, or that there are initiatives or performances or festivals that are being moved over? And if that's not the case, then we would start to really look at, charitable purpose that most closely aligns with the original organization. And so we would start to kind of move down that way, so that then that annual distribution will still live in perpetuity to impact the charitable sector and the arts sector and community as closely as what the original intent was. And why that's important is, again, it goes back to that relationship building with charities, foundations, and their donors. And when a donor is contributing to an endowment fund, it is their intent that that contribution will impact that particular area of the arts in perpetuity. And so we want to be able to honor those contributions and honor the legacies of those donors and the legacy of that particular organization. So we would always maintain the name of the fund would stay as the original charity. So there is that legacy piece at the foundation for that original organization. And then we would find a new recipient. But all money would stay intact, and the Canadian Heritage money also stays in that fund and continues to benefit that particular area of the arts.
And pretty much 100% the same thing in Edmonton as well, with the whole idea of the intended purpose and finding another successor organization. But like Allison mentioned just at the end, we do have to, if that's the case, and there are dollars in the fund that were matching grants from Canadian Heritage, we are obligated to let Canadian Heritage know that that organization has ceased to exist, and then share with them our plan as a suggestion for those dollars. But from what I understand, Allison, it ultimately is up to Canadian Heritage to determine whether or not they want those dollars back.
Yeah.
We have not had that situation. We had a situation where they concurred and agreed with our suggestion, and everything was fine. But we are obligated as the foundation holding those matching grants to let Canadian Heritage know.
Yeah, and we had a similar situation. We've only had one in the history of the program with an organization that closed its doors, and Canadian Heritage was more than happy with our recommendation. And so it was just smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Heather has her hand up.
Hi, yes, thanks for this. I wanted clarification on which dollars can be matched. I think it was commented that donations within 2 years, you could take private donations, and within 2 years they could be put forward. But then the other area was organizational assets. So I'm just trying to understand what that means exactly.
Yeah, so two different things. So the 2-year private donation piece is that donations are eligible if they're coming from an individual, a corporation, or a non-government foundation. They could also come from the organization itself. So Tyler at Quick Draw, well, if you qualified, Tyler, Tyler at Quick Draw could say, you know what, we've come to the end of our fiscal year. We've got some excess dollars. We're going to contribute dollars from our foundation, from our arts organization directly. So we could receive dollars from the organization itself. I think so yes, and that is assets from them, but maybe you're also thinking about the ratio I mentioned, which is how they determine your financial health. They look at your operating revenues and your unrestricted assets, and they do a calculation to ensure that you have the reasonable stability to continue forward with your operations. So two different things, I think. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay. Can I ask one follow-up though? So we were fortunate and received a large donation year 1, but we have to wait till after year 3 to be eligible. We have to have 3 years of operation, correct? But if those dollars are still, if that original donation, which came in 3 years prior, is still intact, are we able then to put that money forward?
Where are the dollars now? Are they with you?
Yep.
Okay, and was there a restriction on how to use those dollars?
Not at all.
Not at all. So those dollars were received by you to use as you wish, and so you can choose then to endow them. So that would be the second part of what I mentioned earlier, where it's they're your dollars. You can choose to send them to a community foundation to endow, and then you would do that. You're right. If you're a brand new organization, when you submit them to the community foundation, that's the window that we're looking at. Yeah. So if you were to submit them today, for example, to Calgary or to Edmonton, even though you got the gift 3 years ago, it's been sitting in your assets. You're now choosing to endow it today. It fits for this year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. There was a question online or in the chat there, Allison. I'm going to go back around auditing. Sure. Where was that audit question? And then Simon rightfully answered it, but let's just see the question. Christy, can you specify more around the level of audit that's required? But Simon, you were correct. So it's if the total eligible donations that you're applying for is less than 250,000, then you have to have a review audit engagement, which is not a full audit. It is a simpler version of that. If you are requesting more than 250,000 ineligible donations, then your organization has to have had a full audit. And that's for the previous year end. So if you're applying for this year, you've got to submit your most recent audit or review engagement report. Does that answer your question, Christy? I'm going to assume yes.
I'm going to assume so, yes.
Yes. Oh, yes, she said yes, thanks in the chat.
Oh,
yeah,
perfect.
There you go. Yes, check. Yeah. The chat is happening faster than Allison and I can keep up here.
There was a question here also from Paul from Rosebud Theatre about are these matching funds available for donations to a private smaller foundation as well? And then Katie did respond in the chat, to be eligible for funding, the foundation must be a publicly registered charity foundation at the time of application as described in section 149.1 in parentheses 1 of the Income Tax Act and have a mandate to accumulate, administer, and invest capital assets for the purpose of providing part or all of the annual income to the beneficiary arts organization. So I'm not sure, Paul, if that answers your question in terms of, just like with the private foundation that you are referencing to go back to that subsection of the Income Tax Act to see if the criteria of the foundation matches that. And then if not, then the answer would be that no, you would have to actually set up that endowment with a public foundation that aligns with that criteria.
There are some organizations, and I see that that Alberta Ballet is on the call. And we work with Alberta Ballet quite closely, but they also have their own foundation. So when they're doing their application, it's actually two parts. There's a part that we've received eligible donations, but then the Alberta Ballet Foundation, I believe is what it's called, or it also receives eligible donations. So it could be, Paul, that it's the foundation associated with that arts partner.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. That we're looking into the possibility of starting our own foundation. So that does answer my question. Thank you very much.
I see that we are just past 4 o'clock. So I'm just going to put it out there. I know some people may have to leave the call because of time, and we did say 1 hour. But if there is a last question for us before we all sign off, we can take that now. But also just to know that we have taped this session and we will send out the link to everybody so that if people had to leave early, that they can get all the information, and we'll copy the questions down as well as best possible. So, yeah, so I'm just looking here in the chat box to see.
Don't see anything new.
No.
Oh, great. Well, thanks everyone. Hopefully this has been helpful and that you've learned some new information, and hopefully this is something that you'll want to participate in. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Allison or me. We are happy to engage conversations, and if we can't answer the question, we'll find a program officer who can.
Thanks everyone, and have a great day, and we will get this out to you in the next couple of days. And yeah, we look forward to chatting with you more if you've got more questions for us.
Great, thanks. Have a great
Thanks
rest of your day.
everyone.
Bye-bye.